So I did a video the other day about finding win conditions in different scenarios, and every time I do these more lecture kind of videos, someone leaves a comment that makes me think of something that I really wish that I had put in the video. So this is going to be kind of like a part 2 to the finding win conditions video, but it should be fine as a standalone video if you haven't seen that one. And at the end, I'm going to go over a game that I made a pretty good comeback with towards Dragapult deck from euic. So in any game that we are behind in the prize trade, we're going to need to get our opponent to miss something at some point. And that usually means that we need them to miss either boss, an attack, or a knockout. And there's usually a couple different plays that we can make, and we want to figure out which play will make it most likely that they miss something. So we want to figure out what exactly we want them to miss. Then we want to take into account what their board state is, what is in their discard pile, what we think they have left in their deck, how many prize cards they have left. And that's going to help us decide what play we're going to go for, or what we're going to choose to attack into, and what we're going to attack with. Then we want to take into account how many cards are in their hand and think about what they did last turn, and that will help us decide how important it is to disrupt their hand. Like if they only have a couple of cards in hand, but last turn they had like 10 cards in their hand and they played it down to just a couple of cards, and especially if they did something like used an Ultra Ball and got rid of a couple cards that you would think that they wouldn't want to get rid of, that will make it more likely that we want to disrupt their hand because they got to kind of tailor their own hand over the course of a couple turns from a bunch of cards down to the few that they have left. So in the examples I'm going to be going over, we are trying to win by taking prizes, and we have 4 prizes left and our opponent has 2 left. And I think this is a pretty common scenario to be in where we're behind in the prize trade, we need 2 attacks to win and our opponent only needs 1, but there is a chance that we can get them to miss something and end up winning the game first. And just for the simplicity of the example, we're going to say that our attacker is able to one-shot whichever one of their Pokemon we decide to attack into. I'm going to go over a few different scenarios, and in each one, we have Counter Catcher and Iono in hand, and we're trying to figure out if we want to knock out their attacker or Fezandipiti. And they need a boss and an attacker to win. So we're trying to figure out if it's more likely that they draw a boss without Fezandipiti, or if it's more likely that they can draw a boss and build up a new attacker with Fezandipiti. So if they have a board that looks like this, we basically always want to knock out the Fezandipiti and disrupt their hand. Since we only have 4 prizes left and they have 2 attackers fully built up, there's no way that we're ever going to get them to a point where they don't have an attacker ready, because if we knock out both the attackers, we'll just win. And we're just trying to get them to miss boss's order the next turn, so Fezandipiti is the clear choice. Let's say their board looks like this instead, and we know that they still have access to Sparkling Crystal. Even though they still have Sparkling Crystal left, I still think that KOing the Dragapult is going to be the better option here, especially if they have any of their energy or ways to find Dragapult in the discard pile. They get to see more cards this way, but they need way more pieces. In total, they would get to see 8 cards. 2 off the Iono, 1 for the top deck. They get to see 2 off Drakloak but can only keep 1, and then they get to see 3 cards off of Fezandipiti. But they need to find Dragapult, Energy, Sparkling Crystal, and Boss. So that's 4 specific cards. But if we KO Fez, they only need to find 1 card and they get to see 5 cards. Obviously the math isn't this straightforward, it depends on what they have left and how many cards are in the deck, but when we KO the attacker, 4 out of their 8 cards need to be what they're looking for, and if we KO the Fezandipiti, they only need 1 out of the 5 cards that they're going to see to be the card they're looking for. Where it would get really tricky is if their board looked like this. Now all they need to find if we KO their attacker is a boss, a Dragapult, and an energy attachment. That may not seem like a huge difference, but before they needed Sparkling Crystal, and that's only a 1-of copy in their deck. So it's not really as straightforward as needing 3 cards versus needing 4 cards, because now all the cards that they need have other ways to get them. They can draw Ultra Ball to get Lumineon for boss or to get Dragapult. They could draw the energy they need, or Earthen Vessel, or Night Stretcher. And this is where we're really going to need to consult the discard pile, and since they need boss either way, we're really trying to figure out how hard it would be for them to build up a new attacker. Like if their discard pile looked like this, they're down a couple Ultra Balls, 1 of their Dragapults, and their Vessel, and 1 of their Psychic Energies, we would be more inclined to KO their Dragapult in this situation. But if it seems like they still have all their outs and could pretty easily build up a new attacker, we might decide to KO the Fezandipiti instead. Situations like this are really hard, because we don't really know which option, if any, would win the game until after it happens. and doing the actual math in the moment would be pretty impossible, so we have to just go with what we think will give them the lowest odds to win. That example might not be perfect, but I was just trying to think of a situation where both options seem pretty even and we have to base our decision on what resources they're down and what we think they have left, and we just want to go with the option that we think will give them the lowest odds to win. Alright, so this is the list that I was playing in the game that I'm going to show. This is the exact 60 that Tord played at EUIC. It's just Dragapult with a Bloodmoon and without a Dusknoir line. And since we don't have all the Dusknoir stuff, this list lets us play a full 4 copies of Lance. So it's going to be really consistent at setting up. We're just sacrificing a bit of power without the Dusknoir line. I was choosing to go second with this since we'd really like to be able to play a Lance or an Arven on our first turn and hopefully get into a Budew and item lock our opponent. So I won the coin flip and chose to go second. And this hand is a little bit awkward. We don't have a Poffin or Lance or anything that makes it completely clear what I should be doing with this hand. I'm either going to Ultra Ball for Lumineon or Dreepy here. I'm not entirely sure what the best option would have been. I end up Ultra Balling for Dreepy, because I figure I can Iono and still probably get into a Poffin or something and hopefully get into Budew and another Dreepy. I choose to get rid of Boss over the Turo. Since we're playing Mirror Match, Turo could be really important, and there is 3 Boss and a Counter Catcher in this list, so I figured getting rid of one of them would be fine. I attach the energy, Iono, and I basically get into nothing here, which is pretty unfortunate because this gives my opponent the option to possibly get into a pretty solid turn next turn where they could even just win the game with like Duskull, Alakazam, and Rare Candy Dragapult in an energy. That does seem like a lot, so I figured the odds aren't that low. That's why I didn't bench the Hawlucha, and the Hawlucha could definitely be more useful later. And if they take 3 prizes here, I probably lose anyway, so yeah, I just choose not to bench that. After their Iono though, my hand is a lot better. This would have been a pretty perfect starting hand for going second, so that's kind of unfortunate. And they do end up deciding to, use their Dusclops and knock out my Dreepy. This makes sense. I'm not going to be able to attack next turn at all. I probably wasn't attacking next turn anyway, but now I'm definitely not attacking. So we're really far behind. We're going to be several turns behind by the time I start attacking, so there's not really very much options here. I'm obviously going to Poffin for 2 Dreepy. One of them is prized, which is kind of unfortunate, and I'm going to have to Budew them. I was considering Lumineon for Arven to get Unfair Stamp, but after thinking about it a little bit more, I have to Lumineon for Turo because I can't just put this Latias on the bench and let them knock it out with the ping damage from their attack. So yeah, I'm pretty much forced to Lumineon for Turo to keep any chance of winning the game. And now I'm just going to Turo the Latias and item lock them. At least this way, they are not able to get into like a Candy Dusknoir and knock out both of my Dreepy somehow. So thought the odds were pretty good for this play, and I decided to use the Night Stretcher. I was going to get Dreepy, but Fire Energy is definitely the better choice. I really want to get into an attack next turn, and if I don't attach an energy, there is pretty much no way that I'm going to be using Dragapult's second attack, and ideally next turn I can hit into their active and knock out the Duskull off the bench to go back onto even prizes and set up the 2-shot on their active, and also make it so that they can't Candy into a Dusknoir and knock out my active Dragapult. Now, I decided to play Lance to get the Drakloaks, and I'm basically just going to pull 3 Pokemon out of my deck. And here, for some reason, I end up using the Forest Seal Stone for Rare Candy. In my head, I was thinking that I needed to hit an energy off the Drakloak, so I wanted to thin the deck out as much as possible with everything else, but I should have saved the Forest. That way I could hit the energy or Rare Candy off my Drakloak, and then just Forest for the other piece. So that was a little bit silly for sure, but either way, I do end up getting pretty lucky and hitting the Vessel off of the Drakloak. And that's the thing when we're really far behind in a game like this, we kind of have to get a little lucky at some point. It is really important here that I get an attack off. If I don't attack this turn, I don't think that there's really any way that I'm going to be able to win the game. I was debating using Forest Seal Stone for Unfair Stamp and trying to draw like Candy Dragapult energy off the Unfair Stamp, but that was just kind of a bad thought. There's really no need to disrupt their hand. They didn't do anything last turn, and there's really a very small chance that I hit all those pieces off of the 5 cards from the Unfair Stamp. They do end up getting out a second Dragapult, and they're not going to be able to knock out my active here, so I have a pretty clear plan to win the game. I'm going to try to get Alakazam this turn to move 2 damage counters off their active onto their bench Dragapult, and then attack and put all the damage onto the bench Dragapult with the 2 damage counters. I top deck the Ultra Ball, so that gives me the luxury to grab Crispin here, just so that I'm able to still attach an energy onto my Drakloak, and now I have everything to get the Bloodmoon attack off next turn on their bench Dragapult. Just deciding what to Ultra Ball away here, and I end up choosing Latias and Drakloak. I think that makes sense. I need to get Alakazam either way. There was definitely some kind of an argument to keep the Latias in case they like try to boss up my Lumineon or stick something in the active, but I figure I have the rescue board and the Crispin in hand, so I'm not really too worried about anything getting stuck in the active spot. I evolved my Dragapult into, or I evolved my Drakloak into a Dragapult. I'm not too sure about that. I really don't know exactly what I was worried about, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that was exactly correct or not, but I did it anyway. So now after that pretty terrible start, I'm somehow ahead on prizes. They can unfortunately win this turn though. If they do get a boss on the Lumineon, they can knock out Lumineon and my Dragapult off the bench, but they haven't had really anything in their hand for the past few turns, so just hoping that stays the same and that they do not have boss. They ended up with a pretty bad hand. They kind of really tunneled on knocking out my Dreepy off the bench instead of fully setting up their board, and that has put them in a pretty awkward spot. They might think that they're in a fine spot because there's a chance that they aren't really expecting the Bloodmoon. The list hasn't really been around that long, so people probably aren't too used to it, but I'm going to have perfect math here to just knock out this Dragapult and win the game, even though we started off with having to wait like 2 full turns to even start attacking. Our opponent was able to attack 2 turns ahead is how I meant to word that, but yeah, now I can Bloodmoon, and I just checked the math like 15 times here because I'm always nervous that I did the math wrong, but 240 plus 80 is exactly 320, and my opponent still could have won the game last turn if they got like a boss on the Lumineon, but after that one turn where my opponent just drew and attacked immediately, kind of had a feeling their hand wasn't the best, so I just kind of let them keep that hand and went all out for the only line that I could see that could win. And that's definitely partially just because Tord's a really good deck builder and had the foresight to put Bloodmoon in Dragapult, which who would have guessed that not having Dusknoir and having Bloodmoon instead would ever help in the mirror, but hey, it worked out. They kind of got punished for popping that Dusclops earlier because it gave me a way to get ahead in the prize trade at some point, which I was able to do by KOing the other Duskull off the bench while hitting into their Dragapult, and that combined with a bit of luck let me win from that pretty abysmal start. So yeah, like or dislike, comment, subscribe, and have a good one.